Chapter 8. A pickle at pork rinds. Oh, I don't like the looks of that. Not at all. They hit the ground running, which isn't easy, but that's what you do when there isn't a moment to spare. Side by side, the trio raced into town, their legs spinning like tiny whirlwinds. In particularly no time at all, they left the countryside behind and were within striking distance of their destination. They rounded the last corner, straight down the sidewalk, at maximum speed, burst through the door of Porkrind's shop. It was a heroic entrance, or would have been if Porkrind hadn't just finished mopping the floor. They skidded headfirst into the pickle barrel. "You got 2 minutes," the shopkeeper grunted. Now, if you've ever run into the long stretch from the schoolhouse to Porkrind's at top speed without a single break, you might think 2 minutes was plenty of time. But you could be wrong. The truth is, for several precious seconds, Cuphead did nothing but stand there panting and gasping and squeezing pickle juice out of his nostrils. But when he finally did manage to catch his breath, he immediately wheezed out, "That's hunky-dory. Because all we want is..." "This airplane," Mugman said. Oh, that was wrong. I accidentally read that in Porkrind's voice, but that was Mugman's voice, so we'll just forget about that. Cuphead whirled around and saw his brother holding one of the models he'd been looking at earlier that day. It was a real beauty, the kind with a propeller that spun when you wound up the rubber band. "We don't want an airplane," Cuphead barked. "This is for Elder Kettle. We want..." "Oh, did you see this fancy can opener?" said Miss Chalice. "Holy moly, those cans won't stand a chance." No, Cuphead said. "We came for the watch, remember?" "Oh yeah," Mugman said. "Elder Kettle could use a nice watch." Porkrind grumped and grumbled, but finally bent over and pulled the watch out of the case beneath the cash register. Cuphead beamed. It was even more perfect than he remembered. He quickly pulled a big wad of bills and coins out of his pocket and plopped it on the counter. It was all the money that Elder Kettle's friends had pooled together, and it made an impressive pile. Porkrind just stared at it. "You're short," he said. "Short? What? But how?" "Oh, no." Instantly, Mugman and Miss Chalice pulled money out of their own pockets and placed it on the counter. Porkrind looked at it as he twisted the toothpick hanging from the corner of his mouth. "Still short," he said. This was getting serious. They yanked their pockets inside out, but found nothing. Then they took off their shoes and emptied them. Still nothing. Finally, Cuphead and Miss Chalice picked up Mugman, turned him topsy-turvy, and bobbed him up and down like a butter churn. Several coins fell out of his straw. "Oh, I'd wondered where I put those," Mugman said. Hurriedly, they slammed the coins on the counter while Porkrind stared at the clock on the wall. "You're still a nickel short," he said, grinning. "And I close in exactly 1 minute." Now, Cuphead was frantic. He reached deep into his pocket and through a hole in the pocket, and finally through a hole in the hole, which led to a place called Pocket Town. It was a nice little town filled with nice little people made of lint. They tipped their hats and nodded politely whenever you met them on Pocket Street or at the lint brewery, because life was a whole lot simpler here. This was the funniest joke in Pocket Town, and they never got tired of telling it. Cuphead's fingers strolled past 7 pocket shops and establishments until they came to a small, neat building with a sign out front. It said Pocket Bank. They walked inside, where it waited behind a velvet rope until the lint teller called them forward. After a warm greeting and the telling of the town joke, they're called tellers for a reason, you know. It's terrible. He handed the fingers a shiny new nickel. Cuphead quickly yanked the magnificent coin out of his pocket and held it up in triumph. Mugman and Miss Chalice cheered. That watch was theirs. The party was saved. But just as Cuphead was about to slap the glimmering nickel down on the counter, "We're closed," Porkrind said. Without another word, he put the watch back under the counter, shoved the money into their hands, and pushed the 3 of them out the door. "Come back tomorrow," he said. The door slammed behind them, and as it did, the sign in the window turned from open to closed. "Well, what are we going to do now?" Mugman groaned. Cuphead shook his head. He was wondering the same thing himself. They slumped down into a big, glum heap on the curb, feeling sorry for themselves and even sorrier for Elder Kettle. This was not at all how things were supposed to go. Cuphead let out a slow, defeated sigh. And that's when he heard it, a kind of rinky-tinky noise. It was happy and sad at the same time, and it sounded a little like music, only clankier. The more he listened, the catchier it seemed, and it was coming from the other side of the square. Thus ends Chapter 8. Moving on, we are on Chapter 9 now, and it's called A Cupful of Trouble. Cuphead, Mugman, and Miss Chalice walked slowly towards the strange music. Now that they'd gotten used to it, what wasn't nearly as horrible as it sounded at first. In fact, it was mesmerizing, almost irresistible. Before long, Cuphead realized it was leading them back to the exact place where he and Mugman had seen the group of people gathered that morning. But now the crowd was bigger and louder and much more excited. "What's all the hubbub, bub?" he asked a man in the pork pie hat. "We're watching Mr. Chimes," said the man. "He plays a street organ." The three friends peered through the crowd. What they saw was a wind-up monkey with hollow eyes and an unsettling smile. Strapped to his back was a fancy-looking box that had a big brass pipe sticking out of it. Every now and then, the pipes would cough out little puffs of steam, and when they did, it made a musical toot. Meanwhile, Mr. Chimes banged two shiny cymbals together as if he were trying to bash an invisible mosquito. Miss Chalice shuddered. "If you ask me, that monkey's bananas," she said. "I wouldn't want to cross paths with him." But Cuphead wasn't listening, and he wasn't looking at Mr. Chimes. He was looking at what was behind Mr. Chimes. It was a gate with a wide, arching entrance and a colorful sign that said, "Carnival." "Wow," Cuphead gasped. "So that's the carnival." It was nothing like he'd ever experienced, and not at all like Elder Kettle had described. Cuphead sniffed the air. The sense of every kind of food came together at once and danced in his nostrils. When he stood on his tiptoes, he saw wonders that he couldn't have imagined. There were gigantic tents, rows of booths and rides. Oh, the rides! He saw spinning rides and jumping rides and flying rides and bumping rides. They looked absolutely thrilling, and without any of the annoying deadliness that came with a roller coaster. In fact, Cuphead was so taken with the place that he forgot all about the mechanical monstrosity and for the first time saw the carnival for what it was, a tiny city devoted to fun. "Let's go in," he said, and boldly walked towards the gate. At least he tried to walk. His legs were moving, but his feet weren't touching the ground. That's because Mugman had lifted him into the air and was carrying him in the opposite direction. "Did you forget what we promised, Elder Kettle?" he asked. "I'm trying to, but you keep reminding me," wailed Cuphead. Mugman carried his brother over to the sidewalk and dropped him there. Then he shook his head and made a disappointed noise, the one that sounds like a chipmunk with something stuck in on its gums. "Cuphead, that's the carnival. You know what Elder Kettle said. It's a vile, evil place that we promised him we wouldn't go," he scolded. Then crossed his arms and turned his back. "But if you want to break Elder Kettle's heart, I won't stop you." "Great," Cuphead said, and dashed off for the grate again. But he didn't get far. How could he? Before he'd even taken 2 steps, Mugman's words were echoing through his brain. They were true, of course. It would break Elder Kettle's heart. He kicked at the ground. Oh, this was agony. He wanted to keep his promise. He really did. But the carnival was right there. Was he supposed to just walk away from what might be the experience of a lifetime? It was a dilemma, all right. A big one. Fortunately, there was someone who he could always turn to for guidance. And at that moment, a very small cup, identical to him in almost every way, appeared out of nowhere. It had little wings, a shiny halo around its straw, and it hovered just above his right shoulder. This was Cuphead's conscience. "Cuphead, listen to your heart," his conscience told him. "There's nothing inside those gates as valuable as Elder Kettle's trust." Poof! "What a dum-dum," said another tiny cup that appeared on his left shoulder. This one had horns and a pronged tail. Take a good long whiff, pal. Did you ever smell anything like that in your life? Forget about Elder Kettle. Just follow your nose to the land of forbidden temptations." "Cuphead," said good Cuphead. "He's trying to lead you to ruin." "Ruin, schmuck! Don't be a sucker. Get in there!" The other cup snickered. Cuphead thought they both made strong points. He listened intently as they argued. His pupils darted back and forth like they were watching a ping-pong match. It was exhausting. Finally, he closed his eyes and wished they'd just both go away. But it wasn't that easy. When he'd opened them again, they were still there. Only now, the good one was holding something white and fluffy. "Is that cotton candy?" Cuphead asked. "Don't change the subject," the cup snapped back. "This is about you." Well, that started the 2 tiny cups arguing all over again, and it might have gone on for hours had Miss Chalice not stepped in and waved them both away. and she put her hand on Cuphead's shoulder. You know, Cuphead, I want to go in there as much as anybody. But there will be other carnivals, she said. Right now, what we've really got to worry about is Elder Kettle's birthday present. If we don't get that, blah, blah, blah. Of course, she didn't actually say blah, blah, blah. But that's what you would have heard if you'd have been there. You see, your attention at that moment would have been pulled to something much more interesting happen just a few feet away. Mugman's eyes, which almost never did anything un-eye-like, had started to spin like two hypnotic pinwheels. Also, his heart was springing in and out of his chest like a paddle ball. It was an unusual look for Mugman, who prided himself on his well-behaved organs, and why it was happening was a complete mystery, until you followed his gaze all the way to the carnival gate. That's where you'd find her, Calla Maria. She was known far and wide as the most beautiful creature on the Inkwell Isles. She had big, sparkly eyes and a captivating smile, and was in every way the very picture of what you'd expect a mermaid to be. She winked at Mugman, and little hearts bubbled out of his straw when she blew him a kiss. His cheeks blushed so red you would have sworn he was breaking out in tomatoes. Now you mustn't blame Mugman for what happened next. It was entirely out of his control. One minute he was standing there as upright as can be, and the next his feet were off the ground as he was floating gently through the air. This has happened twice before in the whole history of the Isles. Once when Tubby O'Toole was levitated by the aroma of a freshly baked pie, and again when a lullaby carried a very sleepy bear home, just in time for hibernation. As you can see, it was extremely rare, and never, ever had it happened on the strength of an airborne kiss, which gives you some idea of Calla Maria's power over Mugman. In the end, he blissfully floated right through the crowd, and it was only sheer luck that Miss Challenge spotted Mugman as he was entering the gate. "We've got to stop him," she cried. She grabbed Cuphead by the hand, and they pushed and prodded their way through the crowd. But by the time they got to the gate, Mugman had disappeared. They were just about to go inside when a large flower with bulgy eyes and a bad disposition stopped them. "Hey, you two," Cagney Carnation said. "What's the big idea?" "My brother just went through this gate," Cuphead told him, "and we've got to go after him. You ain't going nowhere without a ticket, see?" "Those is the rules," Cagney said, and he flicked his toothpick into Cuphead's head. Cuphead didn't like being used as a waste bin. He also didn't like being kept outside while his brother was floating off to who knows where. But buying a ticket? That would be spending money they needed for Elder Kettle's gift. He looked at Miss Chalice. "I don't think we have a choice," she said. Cuphead didn't either. He thought for a moment, then looked at Cagney. "2 tickets, please," he said. Thus concludes Chapter 9. Alright, next video, pick it up from where we left off. Have a good one, guys.